everybody. Faces and certainly some familiar faces as well. I really am honored to work on behalf of House District 53, which is West and North Fort Collins, on behalf of my constituents there, but really on something that I think, traveling throughout our state during the interim, there wasn't a single district I visited where I didn't hear about the need for more housing in our communities and certainly the need for more affordable housing. And so it really is a privilege to carry a few of the pieces of the puzzle this session, and noting that it's just that, right? It's a lot of legislative efforts that really round out, I think, what the state's approach to solving our affordable housing crisis will continue to be. For my part of the conversation, I'm the House sponsor on 1169, which is affectionately known as the YIGBY bill, although I would say YIGBY plus education, just by way of tagline. And Andrea, I'm happy to talk about that one a little more in depth. Also sponsoring a smart stair bill that would allow for single staircase apartment buildings up to 5 stories. That's another housing bill that has a lot of potential based on what we see coming from the 2027, what we anticipate will be in the 2027 building code. And Eleni's stuck working with me on a number of policies, including the modular housing bill, which I think she's going to talk about a little bit later. So it really is an honor to work on an issue that I think is so deeply meaningful for folks, certainly in my community, but across the state. I'll go through, Andrea, if it's okay, a little bit of what's in the YIGBY bill in particular, and certainly happy to follow up as there's questions. But 1169 creates an administrative review process, which, if that phrase sounds familiar, it's very similar to what we included in House Bill 1313, the Transit-Oriented Communities Bill, and also the Accessory Dwelling Units Bill last year. So it creates an administrative review process for congregations, faith-based institutions, public schools or public universities that wish to dedicate a portion of their land for the purpose of housing. And so what we've identified pretty early on is that there's roughly 5,000 acres of underdeveloped or undeveloped land that is owned by churches alone in the Denver, Arapahoe, Douglas County, Jefferson County areas. And some of that land has been sitting vacant for 70 plus years, meaning that congregations purchased that land at some point and their plans might have changed in terms of what they intended to do with that property. I approach it from a couple different perspectives, certainly as someone who tries to represent my community, but also as former Lutheran clergy. And having served in that capacity for a number of years, I saw firsthand how so many times our congregations are understood to be that social safety net for folks in our communities, whether that's housing instability, food insecurity, transit, what you name it. Our congregations have often found themselves in the position of answering or aspiring to answer some of the most difficult questions facing our society in terms of social need. And so the bill establishes the ability of a congregation to build 3 stories or 45 feet worth of housing, as long as, or unless the surrounding zoning would allow for more height. And so if a congregation is inside of a transit-oriented community, for example, they would benefit from the density ceilings in that bill, which is 40 units per acre. But you'll notice we didn't put a density ceiling or a density cap inside of this bill, mostly because if I were to tell you to draw 40 units per acre and gave you a blank piece of paper, I'm guessing we'd come back with about 22 different versions of what that would look like. A better way to think about that is in terms of building height. And by having that 3-story height in there, you actually unlock the potential for tax credits and other things that can allow for affordable housing. On the affordability side of things, the bill includes provisions for local governments to utilize their existing tools, which can mean inclusionary zoning, it can mean deed restrictions, it can mean community benefit agreements. And so I personally believe that our local governments, because they are closest to the needs in their communities, if they've adopted things like inclusionary zoning, they are best positioned to be able to utilize those to affect affordability on a project. Oftentimes organically, because of the way these developments happen, and I'm going to point to Hartside Hill in the city of Fort Collins as an example, the project will come with some measure of affordability baked in because of the capital stack that's included. So in that project in particular, Habitat was heavily involved. And so you see certain affordability requirements that play out as a result. We are actively working on what could be a backstop if there isn't a local affordability in place. And that would look like some sort of statewide standard, which would account for that affordability, which perhaps hasn't been accomplished yet at the local level. I will say other states have enacted affordability inside of their YIGBY bills. California, SB4, for example. And having spoken with some of the folks who researched that bill, have been working on implementing that bill, it stands as a cautionary tale to make sure that you don't adopt an affordability standard that is so restrictive that ultimately no housing can be built. And this particularly impacts rural communities, where if you adopt an, I don't want to say an onerous, but an overly aggressive affordability standard, ultimately you're saying that inside of our rural communities, every project would need some sort of subsidy from the state or from the federal government or a tax credit for it to pencil out. And I think that is not ultimately what the bill intends. The bill intends to build more housing, and certainly in line with community expectation and need. So that's the piece that we hope to solve yet this week in terms of an amendment on second reading. The bill also includes a lot of reasons why local governments could reasonably say no to development. A good example would be is if a property is served by septic and well water, for example. There isn't good infrastructure in place. That is a great reason why we don't want to actually see density on top of a property, because it doesn't further certainly our goals in terms of making sure that density is coupled with pairing and mass transit where there's infrastructure already in place, but it also means an undue burden on that local government to be able to provide services to that development. In committee last week, the bill passed out. We adopted a number of amendments. We limited the qualifying properties to 5 acres, meaning if it's more than 5 acres worth of intended development, it would need to go through the standard public review process as opposed to that administrative review process. We also limited the jurisdiction, policy to jurisdictions over 2,000 people in an attempt not to provide a resource strain on those very small local governments. We added language that ensures that local governments can continue to regulate short-term rentals in this space. So if a local government licenses and otherwise regulates short-term rentals, they would continue to be able to do so under the premise of a YIGBY development. The goal of YIGBY is permanent housing. It is not temporary or vacation housing, so that fits in line with the intent of the bill. We clarified a few things about school district construction. On the discrimination front, which is obviously top of mind for everybody inside of the current federal administration, we added clarifying language that allows for Colorado Civil Rights Division enforcement. I should say that even without the language that we adopted inside of the bill, any housing that is built as a result of a YIGBY proposal would be subject to the Fair Housing Act. It would be subject to the ADA. It would be subject to all applicable state and federal laws in terms of protections against discrimination. A church building housing for commercial purposes, meaning for sale or for rent, is actually contemplated explicitly in the Fair Housing Act, meaning that a congregation could not discriminate based on any number of factors that are listed in the Fair Housing Act simply because they are a church building housing. They would be subject to the same requirements that any other housing provider would be subject to under the law. Also worth noting that the state of Colorado passed our own version of the Fair Housing Act, I believe 9 years in advance of it happening at the federal level. And so Colorado continues to be a leader in this space, and it's certainly our intention that we would do so. We also clarified a few pieces regarding like how much land can be utilized for childcare or education, things like that, to make sure that if you wanted to stack development on top of a single story that was dedicated solely to education or another purpose, that you could do that. All of that to say, I'm terribly excited about this bill. We see firsthand just the need in our communities. And candidly, I think between our public schools and public universities and our congregations, there is a real interest in offering something up. And that something is land, which can really move the needle on the cost of affordable housing in our communities and can be a huge asset to a developer who is in line with the needs of the community to be able to offer something that benefits everyone involved. And so appreciate the time here, certainly appreciate the interest in the bill. And I would just say thanks to the League for all of your good work and learning more about policies like this.
Well, thank you, Rep. Basenecker, for that overview of the bill and providing us with a better understanding of how it actually works. I think we probably have some questions from the group. So I would invite people to go ahead and come off mute and go ahead and ask your question. I see, Julie, you've got a hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Andy. Julie Stackhouse. I put this in the chat too, if you want to read along with me, but we've talked a lot in the Larimer County League about the Legacy Crossings proposal in Loveland, which is a little different in that the church has already sold the land to the Loveland Housing Authority. Just wondering how this bill does or does not address land that is sold by the church to a nonprofit specifically for the purposes of affordable housing development.
Yeah, it's a great question, Julie. And I'm assuming then some of your question relates to the property tax implications, but you can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, I actually haven't delved into why the church sold it rather than developed it themselves, but I'm guessing that's the case.
Yeah, and I'll use Hartside Hill as a good example of that as well in Fort Collins. So Hartside Hill, they retain some level of ownership in the land, I believe, through an LLC, and then the housing is owned in part by Habitat. That housing that is owned by Habitat is tax exempt. I believe the land is not tax exempt, and then the other portion of housing that's not owned by Habitat, I think, has different property tax implications. I would say that overall, it is deal to deal in terms of property tax implications. A congregation building housing is not a straight line to a property tax exemption because so much of that property tax exemption has to dovetail with their stated purpose in the first place, which is the edification based on religious beliefs, right? So most often what we tell folks, and this is why on the last page or near the last page of the bill, there's a mandatory notification process to our county assessors, where at a certain point in time, we're able to suss out like, what is the property tax implication of this ownership structure? Because it will vary from project to project. And in some cases, you'll partner with a nonprofit developer. There'll be property tax implications there for at least part of the development. It really just depends on who's involved in the project and how those things play out in terms of those entities existing to property tax exemptions.
So just to be sure I'm clear though, the property would be need to be quote unquote owned at least substantially by the church and developed as a part of it for this bill to apply.
That's right. Yeah. And we have a 5-year look back period in the bill as well. So it's not as if a congregation could suddenly form today. I can't form the Church of Andy, buy a bunch of land and somehow be eligible to utilize the bill as a result. That's one of the pieces that we included to really correct against any sort of speculation in this space.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what my fundamental concern, that might be a little strong, is there may be some reasons for churches to transfer ownership to a nonprofit, tax or otherwise, and oftentimes it may be at a deep discount, but then presumably the benefits of Yes in God's Backyard would not apply. So just one of those things that I started thinking about of the unintended consequences, perhaps.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you flagging it, Julie. And I think it'll really be, ultimately the congregations or the public schools that are in the driver's seat in terms of how to structure a deal that fits their needs. I think one of the things that we are looking at is providing a know your rights resource for congregations so that they can step into that space comfortably. I mean, I know with the congregations I pastored, like we were not real estate developers. We were not land use attorneys, but we did have a heart to serve the community. And it's my hope the bill can help folks do that with some, good resources along the way.
Well, thanks for that great discussion and clarification there. Don, please jump in. I think you have a question.
Hey, Don, I haven't seen you in a bit. Good to see you. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
I was in another meeting. I apologize for that. Can you hear me now?
We got you.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen you for a couple of years now. The question I have is about freeing up space in church surface lots. I don't know whether the bill touches that, but in Golden, my recollection is that they are required for one parking spot for 4 butt seats in a pew, but their congregation sizes are shrinking, but they haven't like ripped out pews. Is there any thought to not allowing cities to have parking minimums for churches, or in some ways digging into that a little bit to actually free up even more land?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It actually came up the other day in conversation with another member, just that sort of parking equation and how you get at that. And I don't disagree at all. So many of, especially our mainline congregations, face declining enrollment. And what might have made sense at a certain point in times in terms of parking requirements may not anymore. I'm going to take that one down as something to look at. Just in terms of opportunity, I am aware of some congregations. I think there was one in Boulder actually that either did or attempted to utilize their parking structure for the purpose of housing. And I think it comes up more and more. I mean, I think of the congregation I serve, one in particular, where we were definitely overparked in terms of what we required, even on a Christmas Eve or something like that. I appreciate the question.
Julie, did you have another question, or is your hand just up still? Okay.
I'm going to take it as a high five, Julie. That's all right.
Kathy, go ahead.
If there aren't any more questions about 1169, which I really appreciate you going into detail about, is there a chance you could give us a quick overview about single stair?
Oh, I'd love to. If Andrea, if we have time, I'm happy to.
Yes, actually, I think our second set of speakers, Eleni and Megan, are planning to jump in around 7:30. So if we could maybe spend a few minutes on that, that'd be great.
Happy to talk more about that. So as you might know, and Megan and Eleni have heard my pitch before, so they'll be judging about how good I do on this one. The bill was introduced last year. We PI'd it in committee because there were some outstanding concerns related to safety and some things that we had heard from fire that we just couldn't capture. The impetus really for this year's bill is twofold. First being the 2027 group, or the group that is working on the 2027 International Building Code. We saw a smart stair policy, single stair policy come out of the Means and Egress Committee on a 13-1 vote, which means it is all but certain that this policy will be included in the 2027 building code. Then the question becomes, in relation to last year's bill, how do we do this right as a state? Meaning, how do we right size it geographically so that we ensure that, among other things, our fire departments have the appropriate equipment for a response? But also, how are we really making sure that this, what I would understand to be an infill tool, specifically in more urban environments, is right sized to the places where it can move the needle most effectively when you think of like odd sized lots or other opportunities that might exist inside of the city of Fort Collins, for example. And so what the bill does is it says that as of January, I believe it's January 1st, 2027. I don't have the bill in front of me. I apologize. That we would adopt up to 5 stories, a single stairway apartment building would be allowed. What does that mean in terms of current design? It means that at present, roughly 6 to 13% of the cost of a traditional apartment building, and if you think of that as sort of like that dual loaded corridor with a staircase on either side and a hallway down the middle, roughly 6 to 13% of the cost of any apartment building at present is accounted for or can be attributed to that second stairway. Not only that, roughly 40% of the cost of multifamily comes in the form of the land acquisition that's necessary in order to have the footprint big enough to build those apartments in the first place. You have to acquire multiple lots. So when you think about the cost savings and what it means in terms of building affordable housing in our communities, what Smart Stair or a single stair model can offer are smaller footprint homes that can house, 3-4 bedroom in some instances. Limited in terms of the number of units per floor. But what it ultimately does is it reduces those costs off the bat so that you're not reliant on subsidy from the government in order to make a unit more affordable. They just naturally are that way because through the design standard, you've been able to accomplish something that the dual loaded corridor cannot by nature. This year's bill differs significantly from last year's bill in terms of the feedback that we have received from our international building or our ICC folks, from our fire marshals, from our fire chiefs. And you see that in the introduced version. What their ask was and what we continue to do is keep the bill as close to what we expect will be in the 2027 ICC code. So there is very little daylight from an implementation standpoint on those safety pieces. It includes things like non-combustible materials, which you will see via an amendment. It includes things like maximum travel distance from any point in the unit to that exit. It includes the things like sprinkling throughout, pressurized stairways, making sure that There's no outlets for charging like a lithium-ion battery inside of a stairway that could be prone to a fire. Candidly, there isn't a safety measure that our fire friends and our code friends have asked for that is not reflected in the bill at present. We have a little more work to do on two pieces in particular, overall floor plate. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, we'll get there. And I think we have a little bit of wiggle room to be able to accomplish those things. The biggest thing that we see in terms of single stair and smart stair policy is that it is done well elsewhere very well. When you look at the number of deaths, and this is always the statistic that comes up, when you look at the number of deaths in single stairway buildings versus single family homes or even those dual loaded corridors, between, I think it's 2022 and 2024, New York City and also Seattle, there was one death in each respective jurisdiction. It was either 1 or 3. None of those deaths, obviously tragic, had anything to do with ingress or egress into the buildings, meaning they were not impacted by fire's ability to get into the building or residents' ability to get out of the building. In fact, all of those deaths occurred in unit, meaning the fires never spread outside of the unit of origin. So when we look at that statistic as compared to the fire deaths in single family homes, which is obviously a much older version of construction and often includes much older structures, you realize pretty quickly that with the right safety standards, with the right building standards, and if done in the right jurisdictions where fire can respond, this is an incredibly safe way to house folks in our communities once we can really rely on the data and not sort of the perception of safety that a second stairway doesn't give you, especially in relation to the limited height of these buildings. And so I'm incredibly excited about this proposal. I know that there's a huge opportunity in front of us to get this right as a state and be a leader and to do this in a way that makes sense. And that's what I think our coalition is committed to doing.
Dawn, I see that you put a question in the chat. Did you want to come off mute and go ahead and ask that?
Just wanted to clarify that it would be good if you're going to allow single stair and it makes it more affordable that you actually demand the affordability that comes with it, as opposed to they just have better margins and they just do it because it's cheaper to do.
Yeah. Yeah, Don, I don't disagree with you. I think, in large part, I would continue to lean on our local folks to be able to implement things like deed restrictions or IZ in sort of developments like this, as opposed to putting a statewide standard on a bill that doesn't have any funding attached to it. But your point is well taken, in as much as I think, the other piece of this is there is a cost savings that comes with the predictability also. And right now, what our developers are having to do is, I don't want to say fight this, but really make their case project by project, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And what happens as a result is there's no opportunity to do this to scale or in a way that's predictable for the developer. So the point is well taken in terms of margins versus affordability. I think some of that can happen organically and certainly support our local govs being able to utilize their tools in that space as well.
Thank you. And in the law of unintended consequences, if you take away electrical outlets, how are they going to clean the stairwells, or are they going to become a cesspool?
Well, I should hope
just
not.
Wondering.
Yeah. I'm reliant on batteries for my own cleaning of my home, and I'm sure they'll figure that out. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions on this one?
No, but can I just make one other comment? And I think Representative Basenecker, as you kind of mentioned a lot of the points, one of the unique pieces about the smart stair policy too is that we're really seeing a growing demand for more family friendly sized units. We really don't have that on the market right now, or that's not what people are building towards. So there's more opportunities with this policy for more 2 to 3 bedroom as opposed to just studio and 1 bedroom apartments that we're seeing so prevalent in the rental market right now.
And they're really cool looking buildings, y'all. Like when you see some examples of what can be done from a design standard, I mean, I think that they're really neat. And you don't have to pick a north or a south facing unit anymore. You can have both, which is a really awesome thing from an environmental standpoint as well.
Well, this has been great information and great discussion around these two. I think at this point, Rep. Basenacker, we're going to switch over to Eleni and Megan, and we would love to have you stay on for the rest of the call for possible discussion and questions at the end, but we also completely understand if scheduling does not permit that. So whatever works best for you.
Andrea,
Yes.
if you'll give me a little grace, I might log off and log back on and join you all from the car so I can get home and see my kiddos before bedtime.
Absolutely.
All right, see you all shortly. You're in extremely capable hands without me, so appreciate you all.
Thank you so much. All right, Eleni and Megan, let's go ahead and turn it over to you for some discussion, maybe a little more on the bills that we've been discussing, but I know there's also a lot of interest in the modular building efforts too. So I will hand it over to the two of you.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. I'll give kind of an overview of where this bill came from and kind of the context, and then Megan and I can kind of walk through some of the details. So SB2, we're really excited about. Representative Basenecker is actually the House sponsor on the bill. So we're working with him on a ton of housing bills, and Senator Bridges and Senator Exum in the Senate, and then Representative Rebecca Stewart in the House as well. So as I kind of just context set of why this bill is important and kind of where it came from, a couple of years ago, back in 2022, we created the Innovative Housing Incentive Program at OEDIT. And that really, I think, was the goal around that bill was really trying to create more state investment in companies that were pursuing these innovative construction methods, such as modular housing. One thing in particular is, we have companies here that build modular housing, but how can we better promote those modular housing companies to really meet our affordable housing need and create more opportunities for home ownership, recognizing that in a state like Colorado, we have unique geographic and climatic conditions where we're not necessarily always able to build year round, and just seeing the efficiencies and technologies that can happen in the factory. So to date, we've seen such success with that program, of course, especially in the affordable housing space, that we're really excited about. And it's promoted a lot of different partnerships at the local level between local governments, housing authorities, Habitat for Humanities, other mission-minded developers. So that was kind of the impetus a couple of years ago, and we continued some of that investment in this space through Proposition 123, not only trying to grow some of the small businesses here that are building modular housing, but really, I think, also trying to build up our factory capacity so that all four corners of the state can have access to this product and really see the cost efficiencies to ensure that these products can be affordable. So that's kind of just some of the background. One other thing in particular is that the state has played a role in regulating most aspects of offsite construction since the 1970s. But one of the biggest barriers still currently is how many different code variations there are at the local level between some of the climate and geographic conditions that still remain hyper-localized. And so one of the goals of the bill, just on the whole, is to better streamline our processes, not only at the state and the local level, but to reduce some of those regulatory barriers and speed approval processes so that we can continue to lower the cost of housing construction and kind of be able to build to scale with modular, knowing that that can be another tool in our toolbox for affordable housing. So I think, as I kind of mentioned, the state has always played a role in regulating off-site construction, but under the status quo currently in current practice, different building code requirements, inspection processes, and certifications are truly, increasing the cost of these modular housing products. And so right now, the Division of Housing currently issues permits for modular units before they leave the factory. And what we're trying to do is just streamline some of the efforts when the modular product, arrives, leaves the factory, but also is installed on site. So one of the things in particular that we've heard from the industry for a couple of years now is really just the different variations between the state and local codes. And so this bill is really trying to, I think, reconcile some of those changes. So I think I'll have Megan kind of go through the details, and then we can kind of talk through what we've already, I think, amended in the bill and how we've been responsive to some stakeholder feedback. But all in all, we really see this as another tool that can promote affordability and really grow this product in different parts of the state, and not necessarily just the product, but how it can be a tool with affordable housing. So with that, Megan, do you want to just hit the high points of the bill, and then we can kind of talk through how we've been responsive to local government feedbacks thus far, and more changes to come in the next committee hearing.
That's great. Thanks, Eleni. Hi, Megan Yonke. I'm on the housing policy team for Governor Polis. Thanks so much for having me. What we're seeing nationwide is really exciting. We're seeing 20% cost difference between on-site build and modular. In Colorado, we're only seeing a 6 to 8% difference, though, and we attribute that to a lot of lack of efficiency. I mean, Eleni kind of called attention to this, but the big part of the bill is really trying to create groupings, if you will, of communities throughout the state based on climate and geographic conditions, which we know kind of exist, but it will allow us to get closer to traditional manufacturing of housing, where we're only taking into account a couple of factors on site and on site above grade structures like foundations and garages, etc., rather than designing completely different buildings. So we're looking at, not in the bill specifying what those regions are. We're going to take some time to have a community process with lots of feedback through the Technical Advisory Committee, where we're adding 4 seats with local code officials from each of the 4 climate zones in the state, to provide technical testimony of a 19-seat board, most of which are regulatory in nature. There are only a couple of folks from industry. So that board will take feedback, evaluate it, put together some recommendations. In the latest set of amendments, we're going to run those as an FYI to the legislature in 2026 just for transparency. And then they go into a formal rulemaking process with the State Housing Board. So there'll be, again, another opportunity for people to weigh in on the recommended approach. And within 1 year, the State Housing Board is set to adopt some regional groupings, if you will. Something to keep in mind is, Eleni kind of talked about this, but the modular program in Colorado has existed since the 70s. It currently encompasses like 80 to 90% of the total design of a building. It's this really last 5 to 10% that really causes a lot of differentiation between the two. So think wind load, or wind shear, snow load, things of that nature that are kind of can be grouped based on different areas of the state. And so we're looking at those kind of commonalities, but there are probably 6 to 10 different factors that we're really looking at in those cases, and it really doesn't impact your design standards at a local level. So that's one thing we're looking at. Another thing that the bill provides is assuming that you've zoned a property for, let's say, 3 stories, and as residential. As municipalities, with the bill, you'd no longer be able to say modular cannot meet this requirement. It has to be on site. You have to be able to facilitate whatever innovative method of achieving your local objectives is on that site. So we're not prescribing any different zoning. They have to meet your zoning requirements locally. But we are in the bill looking at providing a little bit more of an agnostic approach. Another thing that we heard very strongly from our local partners was that a lot of general contractors in the space are not as educated about modular as they really should be, and it creates a lot of inefficiencies locally. So we've been working to implement, as a part of this bill, a certification program whereby locals can require or facilitate that GCs working on modular projects be certified by the state to understand this, not only the modular building, but how it interacts with on-site variables. And then another part of the bill that we wanted to be really responsive to our local partners is, initially we were looking at taking the bill all the way to regional groupings based on site elements as well, foundations, etc., because there are a lot of inefficiencies between the building and those on-site elements. Based on feedback, we've backed off of that, and instead we're not doing even a study anymore. We're just looking at some ways through this process of engagement of where there are going to be opportunities for future improvement with interaction with on-site elements, but leaving the on-site elements strictly within the purview of locals. So those are some of like the big elements of the bill. Look forward to taking your questions.
And one other thing, yeah, Megan, thank you for some of those details. One of the things that I think we also want to highlight too is I know this group cares a lot about, you know, partnerships and affordability, and we, you know, throughout, you know, the CHAFA data that we've gotten from Proposition 123 in terms of what projects have been funded that are modular affordable housing projects, we have some really good data there. In addition, just to call attention, and this is not exhaustive, but just to call attention to the kinds of partnerships that we've already seen to date and want to promote more of. You know, there was a project in Breckenridge, which was a 54-unit modular affordable housing project in the town of Breckenridge. That project was completed 6 months faster than traditional. That's an affordable housing project that I think the state helped facilitate. But again, just speaking to more affordable housing projects, there's also the town of Granby also recently conducted a recent bidding for 37 for sale affordable housing units as opposed to stick built with, you know, modular construction by Videra, which is a company here in Aurora. We know that Boulder Valley School District and Flatirons Habitat for Humanity have partnered together. We know there's partnerships with Habitat for Humanity in the Roaring Fork Valley. Chaffee Housing Authority has also partnered with Fading West. There's also Rural Homes in San Miguel County that has done modular home ownership opportunities in Norwood, Colorado that are deed restricted. So I say that as an example of just to some of the points Megan and I made of just all of the different possibilities with modular. And I think that's why we're really excited about this bill, because not only does I think it streamline the processes and make this more cost efficient and build to those economies of scale, it also is a really good economic development and job creation tool. And it also is a really good affordable housing tool. So it kind of marries a lot of different priorities, mainly the affordable housing goal. Go ahead, Megan.
Sorry, just to build on that,
Yeah.
the Colorado modular developers who are funded through IHIP are all using very high levels of sustainability, essentially net zero in their construction. And they have affordability targets that they need to develop. They need to be focused on working with affordable housing developers. So this bill doesn't preclude out-of-state developers from participating in the market. But given our high levels of sustainability in our statewide building codes for modular, it'd be very difficult for someone out of state to compete on those high levels of quality without changes to their manufacturing process. So it will highly benefit these kind of local companies that have already adopted high levels of sustainability and affordability targets as well. So I just wanted to bring that up.
And Megan, it looks like there's a question in the comment around the certification of GC from working with modular.
We are still in the process of developing the program. Some more to come. Requiring certification seems to be in the wrong direction. We haven't precluded or required that certification, but it may be something that locals, just as they require certifications and licensing of GCs that work on on-site projects, you may just consider that as part of your, you know, considering the same project.
Thank you for the answer to that. I'm also popping another question in there. Just today, I happened to see a Fading West module that was guided by a guide vehicle. And one of the expenses of offsite construction is the transport. And I would just suggest that you guys are talking about a toolkit that will make it easier for people to understand what the transport issues are, the permitting of the over-the-road, you know, transit of these things. Because if it's a one-off, if it always is a one-off shipment, and it's new to the developer as to, you know, how that takes place, that's an added complication that they're not used to.
I appreciate you bringing that up. I will just say one of the benefits of this piece of legislation, it allows manufacturers to build to inventory and strategically place those units throughout the state within the regions. So it should help to relieve some of this, one-off project, transportation of lots of units, we can be a little bit more strategic in our transportation method as well.
Other questions from the group? Please feel free to come off mute and chime in.
Can I make one more comment that I know that we kind of touched on too is I think for a really long time, offsite construction has really been stigmatized because people have a certain view of it from many years ago. And I think part of the movement in this space too is changing the narrative. I mean, modular housing is very sophisticated. You really can't even tell the difference between stick built and offsite. So that's another thing just about, continuing to shift the narrative to make sure that, we're creating housing opportunities for all, and that it really does not look different than stick built construction. And that I think has been a stigma that we've been trying to overcome as well.
Eleni, how are you all going about trying to change that narrative? Is that like kind of a grassroots sort of thing, education effort? Like what's going into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of it certainly is education and awareness. And I think, part of it is really the state putting stake in the ground of making sure that, to Megan's point, we're incentivizing the right type of construction here, like making sure that the products can be affordable and net zero. But I think that our Office of Economic Development and International Trade and DOLA partner and Department of Local Affairs partnership, especially on the IHIP program, to really build up not only the Colorado grown businesses that are building modular, but to really show that product through those partnerships, I think has really started to change the narrative even more. I mean, it's been changing for quite some time, but Megan, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think that the more and more the state has played a role in it, I feel like the more it's elevated it and amplified that this is a really good tool for us in the affordable housing space. And some of it is also just getting the word out about what it really looks like visually too, to get it out of people's head that we're not talking about a HUD manufactured home here. But Megan, I don't know if you have more thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the earliest battles we had in our stakeholdering in the summer, fall of last year was just to make sure we honed in that we were not talking about HUD manufactured homes. We were not talking about trailers. We were not talking, that's not the model that we're talking about here. We are talking about a product that can be a single family home. It can be a townhome. It can be a duplex. It can be a multifamily structure. The only real difference is that it's produced off-site versus on-site, and that gives us a lot of additional benefit. One other thing that we talk about a little bit is just the uniqueness of our state and our short construction periods. Eleni kind of talked about 6 months to construct a building that's modular. Imagine like having to be a worker in those conditions. It's a much more controlled environment. So being in a factory as well. So just kind of talking about some of the benefits of producing in a factory versus on-site construction.
Well, thanks for that additional information. Definitely one of the things we'd like to try and focus on is, getting the word out about different policy issues and legislation and helping to really serve that education function. So that's definitely something that, we might be able to assist with. Kathy, please jump in with your question.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the league has taken a support position on Senate Bill 2. So yay. And wanted to mention one more thing about the narrative. And for subsidized affordable housing, we've had some luck with our local league in doing tours. And I'm wondering if it would be possible, is somebody compiling a database of the modular housing that's being built around the state, and could we maybe be hooked up with some of the local builders to do some tours and to get people really looking at these communities?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a whole database of all of the projects that have been funded through OEDIT, through our OEDIT and CHAFA partnership, as well as DOLA. We're more than happy to connect you with not only the folks that are here in Colorado, but on some of those projects specifically, we can absolutely get that information out to you. I think that even a field trip out to go see the Fading West factory, or even what they're building in Aurora, or some of these others, I think that those folks are always welcoming people to come in and learn more. So we can absolutely facilitate that. No problem.
That would be awesome if we could work together on something like that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Other questions or comments? I think I just saw something pop up in the chat. Let's see here. Let's see, there's kind of a long comment from Dawn. Dawn, do you want to come off mute and go ahead and ask your question?
I see someone else trying to raise their hand. You can just read my comment and go to the question of the guy whose screen's showing up. Oh, Ted.
Yeah, so
It
I
is.
was just going to add that we have a subdivision that was built in the late 70s and early 80s on about 40 acres that was all modular. But the factory itself was on site. And then when they built the last house, they removed the factory and converted that to 4 lots. And they actually did stick built on site, but that's where the factory was. So it's called Rossboro Subdivision. It's on the west side of Fort Collins. And it was fascinating how they built that. You talk about a controlled environment and building to scale. And they wheeled them out on a huge tricycle device and put them on the foundations with a crane. And it was remarkable to see.
Well, Ted, just to even build on that, some of the innovative construction methods through IHIP include 3D printing of homes too. That's kind of some areas that we're starting to wade in to a little bit. So it's very exciting.
We had one local builder look into that, and it was too expensive, just the machinery.
Let me back that up also in Golden. For what it's worth, the Colorado School of Mines is building a lot of graduate housing. And I talked to one of the workers there, and he actually kind of works on a factory on site. They build modules on site for the apartments that they're building up at the Colorado School of Mines. So that idea is definitely out there, but it's pricey. And like you said, there was 40 units going in. So there's probably some price point where that works and where another price point it may not work.
Kathy, please jump in.
Can you suggest some tools that local communities can keep modular built housing affordable, other than just who gives the financing? Are there some other tools that can be used at a local level to try to encourage this? Because I live in Golden, and you know, pretty much anything goes for a lot of money. So because of the demand, so it would be great to have some tools to suggest locally.
Sure, thanks for that, Kathy. On a local level, absent of funding, you, of course, obviously, have control over your inclusionary housing ordinance in the city about like what levels to build affordable in any building that's built in the city. So I'm not sure in Golden, I haven't looked in a minute to see what kind of inclusionary zoning tools you have locally.
We really don't yet.
Well, certainly, I will just say that at the state level, modular or innovative construction methods is one of our key priorities in our funding mechanism, and every dollar of state funding comes with a covenant. So we're at least doing our part, and then also with IHIP, all the awards for factory financing come with a commitment from the factory to deliver a certain number of affordable units.
Mindy, go ahead. Please jump in.
Thank you. I'd like to build on what Kathy Smith just said and tie this into the governor's office. I know with the quantum commons hub for quantum computing in Jefferson County, there is going to be a huge need for workforce housing in that area. If the 10,000 jobs come along. The estimate is that about 5,000 of them are not going to be, scientist, engineer types of jobs. They're going to be more entry level. So I'd really like to propose that there be some thought of coordination with Jefferson County. They're rolling out a 15-year housing strategy right now, but how to maybe bring a modular developer into that area to help create the housing that's going to be needed. Right now, it's unincorporated Jefferson County / Arvada, but we it's just going to be huge between the transportation needs and the housing needs. So I'd really, since both of you are with the governor's office, I want to make a big pitch for that. Please, work with Jefferson County between transportation and housing, that they really need to work with you, and with School of Mines and the other partners in that development.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point, Mindy. I think part of it too, and I think with part of the goal of the bill too, in creating more of these climate zones or these codes, is that, we can foster more factories coming to different parts of the state, but then they can build that pipeline based on, because Jefferson County, there has to account for obviously the different climatic considerations, and obviously you have the WUI and you have the different considerations with wildfire. But yeah, that's certainly a very good point. And we'll actually bring that back to Eve, who's our head of OEdit, who's doing a lot of that quantum computing work with her team. But that's a really good point.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Between that and the transportation needs, also working with CDOT on highways 93 and highway 72 and mass transit.
Yeah.
There's nothing in that area. Nothing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely.
All right, well, this has been a great discussion. We've got about 5 minutes left. Any last couple of questions or comments for our speakers tonight? Okay, I'm not immediately seeing a hand, so I may jump in with one of my own. Obviously, there's a lot of work still to be done in the session. We're just kind of at the midpoint, so a lot of legislation to shepherd through before we get to adjournment. But I'm wondering if the three of you have thoughts on sort of the big picture, like what comes next, either in terms of legislation that is still to come, or implementation considerations, or even just, kind of thinking about how, affordable housing and increasing our supply has been a big focus of the General Assembly for the last few years. Just kind of what comes next, and, how do we continue to chip away at this problem? I would just be curious to hear thoughts that any of the three of you have.
I'm happy to. Representative Basenecker might have some thoughts on this too. I think it's a really great question. I think, there's always more work to be done. There's always more reform to be done. I think we're really focused on, last year, actually leading up to last year, we had a lot of different sources of funding coming in from the state, obviously from the American Rescue Plan, from the federal funding, from our own Colorado state stimulus. So really being able to see projects come to life based on all of that funding is great. But last year, I think we really focused on the policy reform side. Right now, we're really trying to ensure successful implementation of those bills. I think what you'll see this session is continued efforts on the policy side. And then there are a couple of bills outside of the ones that we mentioned tonight that we're working on and trying, we don't have enough money in the state budget to continue to, have a lot of robust investments outside of Prop 123 and some of the other sources of state funding that we have. But we've been thinking innovatively of how we can have more home ownership opportunities and more investment opportunities. So there's two other bills that we've been working on. One is around mortgages with our partners at CHFA, and then the second is around community investments. So that's another piece of this puzzle too, right? There's YIGBY, there's Smart Stair, and there's the modular bill, which are really helpful on the policy reform side. And then we're kind of thinking innovatively of how do we leverage our state sources of funding currently to better invest them for the outcome of more housing. So that's kind of our focus this session. But I think what's more to come is there's always opportunities for more policy change. And I think, the governor only has one more term Representative Basenecker has several more years to continue to work on housing, but I think it's going to be that push and pull between ensuring that there's still more policy reforms done, changing the narrative on Not in My Backyard, and making sure that we're being inclusive. I think that's still going to remain a top priority of ours. And really just making sure that we're looking at other reforms too, about wealth building and wealth creation, and trying to remove barriers, not only on the financial side, but also on the homeownership side. So that's, I think, Andrea, are my long-winded way of saying there's always more work to be done. I know that we're really excited about the agenda this session, especially absent a lot of resources in the budget. And we're happy to send follow-up information about those other two bills that I mentioned. But I still think that there's a lot more work to be done to change the narrative of more affordable housing that needs to happen in different communities, and just, still fighting the resistance that can happen, I think, with certain subsects of people who don't want affordable housing in their community. So I still think that's top of mind for us, and there's always more work to be done there. I don't know, Megan, if there's more to add there. I know Megan also comes from a background of a lot of really great work at the city of Denver in the homelessness space too. So I don't know if there's more to add there, Megan, but.
Yeah, I just would add that some of the things that we're looking at this session in Senate Bill 6 and then the Community Investment Bill is using some big corpuses of dollars and investments we have as a state to invest at below interest rates. We know that a lot of affordability isn't happening because it's just so hard to get affordable debt to build these buildings. And so a lot of our creative work around that is just to try and play with some state investment corpuses to funnel more investments into home ownership and affordable rental as well.
Rep. Basenecker, please jump in.
Hey, my apologies. My internet dropped out for a second. So if this has already been covered, I would just say that one of my other main priorities this session is construction defect reform. I've partnered with Representative Byrd on a bill alongside Senators President Coleman, and Senator Roberts on that piece. And I think, my interest in that space is what I continue to hear from folks in my district, that there's very few opportunities to buy a home at a price point which is attainable, and then very few opportunities to downsize when life perhaps hands you different circumstances. You want to consider a smaller home. And so I think that piece is a really meaningful piece of reform that we should look at to really be able to encourage more opportunities for home ownership through condos. And then I would say, to echo what Eleni mentioned, I think there's future policies which I'm certainly keen to contemplate next year, specifically related to smaller footprint homes and what we can do to encourage, folks with an abundance of land to be able to perhaps split those lots accordingly. And what that looks like is TBD. It's a big swing, but I think certainly whatever we can do to help encourage and build generational wealth in the form of home ownership, I want to have that conversation as a state.
Great. Well, thank you for that information. This has been just a fantastic discussion. We really appreciate the information that the three of you have provided. If Eleni, if you wouldn't mind sending on the additional information on the other two pieces of legislation, I'm sure our group would love to have that. And if you can direct it to me, I'll make sure everybody that attends gets it. But with that, I know we're at the end of our time, and people have got a lot of other things on their plates, I am sure. So we'll go ahead and close out, but I do want to extend a big thank you to Representative Basenecker, Eleni, Megan. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us. And thank all of you for attending and for being part of this conversation. We really appreciate it, and have a fantastic night.
Thank you for having us. Take care.
Thank you so much. Really
Thank
appreciate
you very
it.
much.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, of course. Bye.